Hi, and welcome to the 2017 Online Tiny House Summit. I'm Sarah Isabella, and today we're here with a Community Day presenter, Michael Chance, who's going to be talking about harnessing solar energy. Take it away, Michael.
Right. Hello, world, and thanks for taking time to join us today. We have a lovely presentation designed to educate you about everything solar. And as Sarah mentioned, my name is Michael Chance, and I'm with the Tiny Solar House. So just starting off with a little bit about me, I'm the founder of Chance Marketing Group, which is a consulting firm that specializes in online marketing and company communications for small businesses. I've been active in the solar industry since 2010. And like many of you, I'm a tiny home owner, an avid traveler and explorer. So I've dubbed my tiny house the Tiny Solar House because, as you can guess, it's powered by solar. It's a roughly 210 square foot tiny house built on an 18-foot trailer. I'm a little more unique than most tiny houses because I'm actually mobile in mine. I've actually traveled 12,000 miles last year, including 10 national parks and 20 US states. And as you'll see, my design was inspired by two pretty popular tiny homes. The Minim, which was designed by a guy based out of Washington, D.C., and I think the other one's called the Kiwi, which is designed by a New Zealander. And do a couple photos of my tiny house. You can see this is the exterior. We have some cedar and aluminum accents. Looking inside the tiny house kitchen. Decent room for all things cooking. And then here's a view of the living room slash workspace slash art studio. My travel partner is a wonderful watercolor artist, as you can see. So some of her art's up on the wall. And then the picture on the right just shows our desks and our pull-down projector screen, privacy screen. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And here we are looking at the outside of the tiny solar house. And yeah, what are those interesting looking rectangular things on the roof? Those are solar panels. So let's talk about that. So solar energy is abundant and free, and the tiny solar house produces its own power using 6 solar panels, and it's an off-grid system with batteries. And we'll get into the different types of solar power systems in a little bit, but just right now I want you to know that the tiny solar house has 6 panels that are rated at 280 watts each. And this is kind of a standard size for the solar industry. You know, back when I started, I think we were installing panels that were 230, 235 watts each. Now, you know, you get them anywhere from 250 to sometimes 315 watts, sometimes maybe even a little bit more. But the ones that I have on my house are 280 watts each, and we have 6 of those. So that is 1,680 watts, or as we in the industry like to say, it's a 1.68 kW system. kW just stands for 1,000 watts or kilowatts. We'll get into that too. And so with my system, when the sun is shining, solar panels absorb and convert sunlight into energy and transfer it to the battery bank, where it can either be stored or used. So let's talk about solar energy. We rely on solar energy every day. Without it, our plants would not grow and our planet would not have light or warmth. Did you know the sun emits enough solar energy in just 1 single hour to provide the entire world's power needs for a full year. It's a very, very, very powerful resource. And unlike other forms of energy, solar does not require mining resources from the earth, and it does not produce harmful greenhouse gases or carbon emissions. So the takeaway is that sunlight is solar energy. So let's talk about some reasons to consider going solar. First and foremost, it is an environmental choice. Solar is clean, emission-free energy from the sun. It's also a smart financial decision. You can save money by producing energy yourself instead of buying it from the power company. You might also look into solar because of independence or autonomy reasons. You can have power even when the grid goes down. We've got a little star there because that's only in certain instances. We'll get into that. And some other reasons to consider going solar. I think it's pretty cool. Feels pretty good knowing you're part of the solution. You're supporting something that benefits not just yourself but other people. And most of the time, your solar power system is going to have a 25+ year lifespan. The solar panels are definitely going to last 25 years under warranty. Most major manufacturers give a 25 to 30-year power production guarantee, which just says, at the end of 25 or 30 years, we guarantee that this panel is still going to be producing, in most cases, 80% of its rated power. So yeah, solar is a smart long-term solution. And we're going to talk about the three main types of solar energy systems: passive solar, solar thermal, and photovoltaics, or sometimes called solar PV. So with passive solar, it's not so much a technology, but more of a technique. You can think of it as a way to design or orient a home so that it harnesses rays from the sun and uses sunlight for warmth within the home. Passive solar gets its name from the lack of mechanical and electrical devices that are used with active solar. So active solar is going to be solar thermal and solar PV. You can think of passive solar as basically sunbathing, right? You're just laying out in the sun and you're harnessing the sun's energy. So with passive solar, you're going to want a south-facing orientation if you're in the northern hemisphere. So here's a good example, side view of a home. You can see that we're basically just harnessing energy from the sun through some windows or some openings, and that's kind of the simplest way to do it. You can even have some sort of thermal mass on the bottom of your home to absorb extra solar energy, but passive solar is pretty simple. It's basically sunbathing, like I said. So you can take advantage of passive solar by installing specially glazed windows on the south-facing side of your home. Or if your home's already built, you can just face your existing large windows toward the south. So the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So these windows will absorb thermal heat from the sun all day long, giving you the ability to warm your home without turning on the heat or plugging in a space heater. And in the summer, when you want to block out the heat from the sun, you can install some sort of external or internal window covering. Maybe you just pull down some shades or curtains to keep your home cool and block out the sun. And here's a photo I showed before. So like I said, this is our pull down projector screen, which we use for watching things, entertaining ourselves. And you see that we can pull it down all the way and block out the light coming in from the windows. So this is a great example of a passive solar application. And as we all know about tiny homes, the more multifunctional things are, the better. So here's a great suggestion or example coming at you from the tiny solar house. Projector screen that can double as a privacy or sunshade. Passive solar. All right, our second most common type of solar energy technology is solar thermal. So if you can imagine a black hose filled with water and put out on your driveway during the hot summer days, as the sunlight hits this tube, the dark black color absorbs energy from the sun, but instead of electricity, it produces heat. So the fluid inside the hose, in this example water, is going to be heated by this solar energy. And these type systems can get very, very hot, in excess of 400 degrees. So watch out, hot water. Here's a simple diagram example. You've got your solar thermal collectors on your roof. They could go in the ground as well, but tiny home example. So they're going to be doing the sunbathing, harnessing the sun's solar energy, and sunlight's going to heat the collectors, heat the fluid inside, and then it can go into your water tank and come out your shower, come out your sink faucet, anywhere you want hot water. So yeah, with the solar thermal system, your water is essentially warmed by sunlight for free. You don't have to rely on natural gas, propane, or electricity for the warm water you'll use washing dishes, doing laundry, etc. And with the topic of solar thermal, there are two different types of collectors that are commonly used. One of them is called flat plate, and the other one's called evacuated tube, both of which function the same, but just look differently. Here's your example flat plate solar thermal collector diagram. You can see it's kind of just like a rectangular box, and it's got some tubes inside the box that are filled with a fluid, and they get circulated around the collector, and then they get circulated into your water tank. On the left-hand side, you can see where water would be coming in, circulated down around the collector, and then on the right-hand side, where water goes, or fluid, we should say fluid because it's not always water. So where fluid comes out. And here's your second example, evacuated tube solar thermal. Pretty much the same idea, it just has a little bit different look. When I was traveling around Southeast Asia a few years ago, I saw these collectors everywhere. Solar thermals, it's a great idea, right? You're just warming your water with sunlight, and they get that in Southeast Asia. All right, and now on to the main event, photovoltaics or solar PV. It's the most common type of solar technology. So photovoltaics gets its name from the process of converting light or photons to electricity. So photons, voltage, photovoltaics. With solar PV, you have the ability to harness energy from the sun and convert it into electricity. All right, so different from solar thermal because we're actually generating electricity, not just heat. And this solar electricity can then be used to power anything within the home that runs on, you guessed it, electricity. If you have an electric water heater, for example, A solar PV system can provide the electricity to make the heat. So in this example, you wouldn't need a solar thermal water heating system. Just connect your solar panels to your electric water heater, and you're heating your water with sunlight. So here's a good example of what solar PV looks like and everything that's involved with it. You basically have your solar panels, which in this example are mounted on a roof. They can also be mounted on the ground. But in this example, we're mounting them on the roof using some aluminum rails. It gets drilled into the joists of the roof, gets connected to the utility grid, and then you've got your inverter, which inverts the energy. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So within the topic of solar PV systems, there are two main types of setups: grid tied and off grid. So grid tied is going to be a lot more common. I would say 99% of all the solar installs in America are grid tied. There are no batteries in this type of application. You're dependent on a grid connection. Grid tied is less complex, less expensive than off grid. However, with grid tied systems, if the grid goes down, the system's going to shut down. And that's a safety ruling, because we wouldn't want to be backfeeding solar energy back into the grid when there's some first responder or power line worker working to resolve the problem. So with grid tied, you have a two-way grid connection, meaning energy is going to be flowing backwards and forwards. Now let's compare it to off grid. Less common. It uses batteries. It's not dependent on the grid, right? Off grid, it's definitely more complex because of the batteries, and more expensive because of the complexity in batteries. However, with off grid, if the grid goes down, your system's still up and running because you're not dependent on the grid. So how does grid-tied solar work? So your energy or light is collected by the solar panels and sent into an inverter. The inverter converts or inverts this energy from DC to AC, direct current to alternating current. That's what our homes run on here in America. It can then be used as power. The PV system is connected to an everyday household electric panel or breaker box. When electricity is needed, solar energy comes out of the inverter from the panels and goes directly to the load. The load is, anything that runs on electricity: light bulbs, refrigerator, fan, phone charger, all that sort of stuff. And with a grid-tied system, you're working bi-directionally with the grid. So excess solar energy can be sent back into the grid, and additional electricity can be pulled from the grid. Like some clouds roll in, and your system's not generating all of the energy your home requires at a given moment, then you're just going to pull electricity from the grid, as many of you are doing right now as you're listening to this presentation. So here's a good illustration of how a grid-tied system works. So you've got your solar panels on the roof. Everything goes into the inverter. Inverter's connected to the breaker box or electric panel, which is connected to all of the loads within the home. You're also connected to the meter, and the meter is connected to the power lines. So the important thing to note is that there's a two-way utility service connection with grid-tied solar. Again, energy can flow both ways. When you have this type of system, If you already have a power meter, it will very likely have to be reprogrammed to be bidirectional compatible so that energy can flow both ways and so that it can be properly recorded. Now let's compare grid-tied to off-grid solar. So your energy is collected by the solar panels and then sent to a battery bank for storage with an off-grid system. The batteries are connected to a charge controller to prevent them from being overcharged, and then connected to your electric panel or breaker box. When electricity is needed, solar energy comes out of the battery bank and goes to the load, the light bulb, refrigerator, fan, whatever it is. On the way to the load, it goes through an inverter where, just like with the other type of solar, it gets inverted from DC to AC, and it can then be used as power. So here's your illustration with off-grid solar, and the biggest difference here is that we are not connected to the grid, we are not dependent on the grid, we are just doing our own thing using sunshine for energy. So you can see you've got your solar panels up top. It's gonna go down past the inverter charger, go through a charge controller, go into the batteries, and then you've got your loads off on the left. So similar but different, I like to say. So no sunlight, no problem. Because sunshine is variable, the battery bank with an off-grid system is designed with a reserve to store energy for use at night and on cloudy days. So what that means is you've got to understand all of your loads and properly size your battery bank so that you've got some juice to pull at night. And here's my tip. Some off-grid systems, like the one used on the tiny solar house, even have the ability to be plugged into the grid for emergency needs. Like if you have back-to-back-to-back rainy days and maybe your battery bank is not at a desirable level, with this type system you can, I should say with the system used on the tiny solar house, you can plug into the grid if it's available and charge up those batteries and power those loads. The picture on the right is the tiny solar house. Of course, a nighttime picture just to illustrate that here's our off-grid system working at night. I promise you we were not plugged into the grid in this example. This was a national park in Colorado within, I'd say, the first 3 months of the travels. And I should note that off-grid systems, they can really work well. We went our whole first 6 months without needing to plug into the grid. We'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so let's talk about calculating your power requirements for solar. So you have a decent understanding of the two main types of solar PV systems. So the next thing you need to do is figure out how much energy your house uses. So let's briefly discuss how power is measured. Power is measured in watts, big W, in kilowatts, kW. 1,000 watts is the same as 1 kilowatt. So 1,000 Ws equal 1 kW. Imagine a 1,000 watt light bulb burning for a period of 1 hour. It's the equivalent to 1 kilowatt hour, which can be expressed as kWh. And you are charged by the electric utility for every kilowatt hour you use. They look at your bill, look at the next bill you get, and you'll see that they break out your kWh usage or consumption. So here's a tip. Every kilowatt hour that you produce with solar is money saved by not buying it from the utility. All right, so now we're talking about calculating power needs for grid-tied solar. The first step would be to pull up your old power bills, ideally the past 12 months, and look at how many kilowatt hours were used. So if you look at this example power bill on the right, we've got our kWh highlighted in that blue box. And since you're going to be designing your system and your output from the solar panel is going to vary with the seasons, you'll want to look at your average usage as well as your highest and lowest months usage, just to give you an idea of, you know, in a bad case scenario, our highest power bill, we need X number of kilowatt hours. In a good or average example, we need a little bit lower amount. And then with that data, you can calculate how much solar is needed to generate a given amount of energy, your minimum, maximum, or average monthly requirement. So if your power bill data is not available, for example, many of you are in the process or planning of building your tiny houses, you can do a few things. You can find the electrical specs using the manufacturer's data from a product label or from the Energy Star website, which is data.energystar.gov. That's pretty cool. You can search by manufacturers of various appliances, and you should be able to pull up the electrical specs. Or you can buy a kilowatt meter and find out what's killing you. Just a joke taken from their website. So this photo on the right is a kilowatt meter. They run 20 to 30 bucks depending on which model you want, and you can see that you basically just plug directly into it, and then it gets plugged into your outlet, and it'll tell you your volts, your amps, your watts, your hertz, and your kilowatt hours. So you need to know how much power you're using in a given month in order to be able to correctly size a solar system to generate that amount of power, or half or a third or more. So you really, I'm emphasizing that you need to know how many kilowatt hours you're using per day, per month, per year, etc. If you want to have a properly designed system. So once you've calculated your consumption, we can then determine how much solar is needed. So another example I like to use is the PV Watts tool designed by the National Renewable Energy Labs, or NREL. It's pvwatts.nrel.gov. And when you get there, you can type in your address or zip code to use corresponding weather data for solar production. And I encourage you to go to this website and play around with the system info inputs using 1 kW, a 5 kW, and a 10 kW system to give you different ideas of the amount of solar that will be produced by different sized solar systems. And keep in mind that 4 250 watt solar panels is going to be equal to a 1 kW system. If we have 20 of those 250 watt solar panels, it's going to be a 5 kW system. All right, so here's a screen grab from the PV Watts website. And this was just an example. I did 1.68 kW system because that's what the tiny solar house uses. Standard modules, were installed fixed on the roof. your system losses, your tilt, your azimuth, all of these variables can change. If you have questions about them, just click that little eye icon and it'll explain what these things are. But if you're south facing, your azimuth is going to be 180, and then your tilt or your angle is going to be based on the slope of your roof, and your system losses are a function of the type system and the components that you have. So once we hit compute, here are the results that were spit out. So again, this was a 1.68 kW system. I was using it based on a location in Austin, Texas. And you can see that PV Watts is so smart. It knows all the weather data. It knows how much solar is going to be produced by different size systems in a given location. And so it'll tell you how much AC energy or kilowatt hours you'll produce each month, and it'll tell you what that is on an annual level. It'll even tell you what that energy is worth, just based on the dollar amount, the number of cents per kilowatt hour you assign on the previous screen. I think in this example I used 12 or 13 cents. So a 1.68 kW system is going to produce about $330 per year worth of energy based on some standard assumptions and weather data from Austin, Texas. All right, so designing a grid-tied solar power system. We're going to talk about all the components that go into this. So your system is going to be made up of, but not limited to, the following items. Your solar panels, which are sometimes referred to as modules. Your inverter or microinverters. A microinverter is a little bit newer technology. Back in the day, we were just using one inverter for the entire solar install. And what happened was, if there was shading or if you had some bird droppings on some of the panels, that loss or lower energy production of that one panel would affect your entire system, so all of your panels. So fast forward today, and we have some newer technology. A microinverter is going to go on the back of each panel. So there's going to be multiple inverters or multiple microinverters, and they're just a little bit smarter, and they can resolve and recognize any sort of shading issues, like I mentioned before, and make sure that the entire system isn't affected by it, that it can be isolated to just one panel. So that's pretty cool. So in addition to your solar panels and inverters, you're going to need racking and mounting hardware, wiring, a combiner box. You're going to have a new breaker that's going to be installed in your breaker box or electric panel and tied to the PV wiring. You're going to need a disconnect switch. Your utility meter is going to have to be reprogrammed to measure electricity flow. And you'll probably want to purchase some monitoring software from the inverter company to give you peace of mind and real-time data of how much energy is being produced by your solar panels. So again, this is designing a grid-tied solar power system and all of the hardware and components. Now, I do want to say that danger, high voltage warning when you're dealing with solar PV systems. If you tie into the local power grid, you're going to have to submit what's called an interconnection agreement. It's basically a notification that, hey, local power company, we're going to be producing our own power, and there's a chance we're going to send it back into your grid. And so because you are using their grid in a grid-tied system, they will have to approve your interconnection agreement, which means your installation will have to pass a utility inspection and possibly a building inspection, depending on where you live. So if you're thinking of doing this yourself, electrical knowledge and experience is highly recommended. And keep in mind that you're gonna have to get this approved before you can tie into the grid. So I cannot emphasize enough that you should contact a local solar installer to handle the entire install, you know, and at a minimum to inspect everything and help you out with the paperwork and the interconnection agreement and all that stuff. All right, so that was grid-tied solar. Excuse me. And now we're going to talk about calculating power needs for off-grid solar. So a similar conversation. To understand how much solar with battery storage capacity a tiny house owner needs, one must first know what loads will be in use and the approximate amount of power that will be burned by each of these loads. So these are going to vary by individual, going to vary by the tiny house, and how off the grid you can actually live, but will generally be a mixture of the following: your refrigerator, freezer, your stove and hood or venting, your LED lights, your ceiling fan, your exterior lights, your small electronic appliances, laptops, iPads, iPhone chargers, etc. In my example, a projector, but yours might be a TV. Your water pump, maybe your washer and dryer, a small heater, and an air conditioner. And now you see that some of these loads have a star next to them, and that's because these consume large amounts of power. So the conversation is the more power that is required within the home, the larger the battery bank that will be needed. The larger the battery bank, the more expensive the system's going to be. So tiny solar house doesn't have a washer dryer. We don't currently have air conditioning. Wanted to see what it would be like living without air conditioning, and we're now 9 months into our travels, and we've been fine. So I don't know if we'll do air conditioning in the future. We do have a small heater, and we do run that during the daytime or maybe a little bit at night. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So if your power bill data is not available, again, because of new construction, you can do the same things that we talked about with grid-tied solar. You can find the electrical specs from a product label as you're ordering these appliances, or you can look it up on the Energy Star website. If you already have them and you can't find the product label, you can plug them into the kilowatt meter and find out exactly how much power they're using. And so this is a similar conversation to grid-tied solar. You really need to calculate your daily and monthly kilowatt hour consumption to have an understanding of how much energy you're using, and from there you'll be able to figure out how much energy you're going to need within a given type of battery bank. All right, so here's an example load profile. We've got a refrigerator freeze combo running at 24 hours of use. We've got a small electric stove, LED lights, outdoor security lights, electric fan, coffee maker, cell phone charger. So basically your load's electrical rating multiplied by the hours of use in a 24-hour period in this example will give you the number of kilowatt hours that load uses in 24 hours, and then you add those all up. In this example, we have 7.23 kilowatt hours. So using your load profile, you can then determine what size battery bank is needed and how many solar panels would be needed to provide a given amount of power. Now here's a tip. With off-grid solar, things that produce heat require a lot of power and will rapidly deplete a battery bank. So use with caution or when there is full sun only. Things like a toaster, toaster oven, crock pot, small heater, blow dryer, microwave clothes dryer, all of these things are energy thirsty, right? They use a lot of energy. Can all of these things be supported by an off-grid solar kit? Yes. I'm not going to say no because nothing's impossible. It can be done, but it would require a very large battery bank and a much more expensive system. So remember, we're designing our load profile based on our usage, which is a function of the specifications of these loads. The more loads we have, the more usage we have, the higher our kWh number is going to be, and thus the bigger our battery bank is going to be. So another thing I want to emphasize is, with a toaster, for example, I'm going to wake up in the morning and, depending on the time, the sun may or may not be rising. Depending on how much energy we used the previous day and throughout the previous night, we might have 50% of our total storage capacity in our battery bank. So if I know that the sun's about to come up and recharge the battery, then maybe I'll go ahead and use some of these things because I'm not worried about it. But if it's at nighttime, then and say my battery bank's at 10%, and I know that I'm going to run my fan for the next 8 to 10 hours, maybe I won't use my toaster to make a toasted PB&J because that's very valuable energy that's being wasted. Maybe I'll just make a regular PB&J and not toast it. So these are conversations that you have to have when you're living with an off-grid solar kit. And I think one of the examples I'll get into in a little bit kind of talks a little bit more about that. All right, so again, we're talking about off-grid solar power systems. It's going to be made up of, but not limited to, the following items: your solar panels, your batteries, your charge controller, going to regulate how much those batteries get charged, your inverter, going to convert the DC to AC, your racking and mounting hardware, your wiring, your breaker, your disconnect switch, and you're probably going to want a system display so that you can always see how much juice is in your battery bank, and so that you can make intelligent decisions. And just like with grid-tied solar, I'm going to give you the same warning with off-grid solar. Danger, high voltage. Electrical knowledge and experience is highly recommended if you're going to do this yourself, but I highly recommend that you contact a local installer to handle the entire installation. Again, earlier when we were talking about the two main types, grid-tied versus off-grid, I said that off-grid is more complex, right? So I can't stress enough that if you're considering going the off-grid solar route with your tiny house, you should really have a local installer, a local solar installer who's familiar with batteries and energy storage. Get them involved, because it is a lot more complex than your standard grid-tied install. So let's also talk about understanding your consumption behavior. How energy efficient or energy inefficient you and your home are plays a role in your happiness or frustration with solar. Are you the type of person that turns off lights and unplugs appliances when they're not in use? Excellent. You're already conditioned about saving energy, so good for you, and you're well on your way to understanding how to live in an off-grid house. Or are you the type of person that runs your air conditioning when outside temperatures are cold? That's wasting energy. You could just open up your window and let the cool air come inside and cool off your house. So if that's the type of person you are, then you're probably not going to be able to live in an off-grid house. So my recommendation is have an honest conversation with yourself before you decide to go this route, and it'll save you frustration down the line. I'm not encouraging you to live your life any differently than you want to. I'm just saying have an honest conversation. And when off-grid, learn to maximize your solar output by using electricity when the sun is shining. As I mentioned before, this may involve shifting your behavior. So think about my toaster example. If it's sunny out, your solar panels are bathing in the sun and generating all of that beautiful, delicious solar electricity for you. You can go ahead and use your toaster and do all of your daily chores that require electricity. Do them when the sun's shining. Don't save them for nighttime, because that's valuable energy storage in your battery bank, right? It's just shifting your behavior and maximizing your solar output is what I want to emphasize. All right, so now we're going to talk about some tips, suggestions, and useful information related to solar. So remember that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, at least in the northern hemisphere. Here's your illustration on the right. You can see there are different paths the sun will take depending on the season, different angles, if you will. So in the winter, the sun angle is lower and days are shorter, which lessens solar panel output. In the summer, days are longer, angle is more conducive to generating more solar. So just remember that your solar production is going to change with the seasons. Here's another tip. Shading is a solar panel's worst enemy. So if they're shading on a solar panel, it's not producing the maximum of energy possible, right? It's going to affect your production or your output. So I want to encourage you to consider your location of both your home and your solar panels. And remember that trees grow taller over time and can cast long shadows during the winter. So here's a great example of an improperly designed solar system by a prominent national installer. I can only imagine, based on the shadow of the tree in this photo, that those panels are facing east, although they could be facing south, and the sun could be towards the west. But the takeaway here is you're not maximizing energy through solar panels in this example, because there's far too much shading. Those panels are totally covered. And then, for this homeowner, then it's a conversation of, oh, well, do I really want to remove that tree? And is that tree even on your property? Can you remove it? Can you just trim the limbs? That's a headache that you don't want to have. after you've already invested your money in a solar system and signed a contract. So think it out in the beginning. Do an evaluation of your property and look for shading from trees and tree limbs and pipes and power lines and power poles, and just put your solar panels facing due south, where there is as little shading as possible. That's my suggestion. Couple more tips. NABCEP, or the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, nabcep.org is a great resource where you can go, click on the map, type in your location, and find a licensed solar installer in your area. You can contact these solar installers directly from the NABCEP website and shoot them a little message that says, hey, I'm interested in a grid tied or an off-grid system. So I recommend that you definitely do that, again, at a minimum for inspecting your system or handling the entirety of the installation. Another resource that was mentioned earlier was pvwatts.nrel.gov, and that's the website where you can go and estimate solar production for your location. And then I do want to point out that desireusa.org is a good resource to learn about solar rebates and incentives available in your state and from your utility. I want to point out that a 30% federal tax credit is currently available for both residential and commercial solar applications. So that's kind of like a 1/3 off sale. And then depending on your location, your state might have a solar tax credit. Your utility might have an incentive or rebate for a grid tied application. Here in California, where I am currently, the utilities are offering incentives for batteries. So there's a good chance that could happen in other locations in the not too distant future. So desireusa.org to learn about all of these various solar rebates and incentives. All right, let's also remember for off-grid applications that amps times volts equals watts. Okay, A times V equals W. 1,000 watts is the same as 1 kW or 1 kilowatt. In the off-grid example, kWh is going to refer to storage capacity, while kW is going to refer to solar power capacity. So with our storage example, 100, let's say a battery with a 100 amp hour capacity at 12 volts is going to be 100 times 12 equals 1,200 watt hours, or 1.2 kilowatt hours. And with our solar panel example, if we have 5 250 watt panels, it's going to be 5 times 250, and that's 1,250 watts, or 1.25 kW. So keep this in mind when you're price comparing, evaluating different options. You want to make sure you compare the total wattage offered, total amount of wattage by the solar panels, and the total storage, which is going to be watt hours or amp hours of these different kits that you may be considering for your tiny house. You can calculate the best deal using dollars per watt hour, which is total cost divided by total watt hours for capacity. And for solar power capacity, it's dollars per watt, or total cost divided by total watts. So here's an example of a popular off-grid solar kit that I see people discuss online. This is your Goal Zero Yeti 1250. It's basically a battery pack with an inverter, um, listed at $1,600. You can see our battery capacity is rated at 1200 watt hours, which is the same as 1.2 kWh. So if we take $1,600 divided by 1200 watt hours, we get $1.33 per watt hour of storage capacity, or $1.33 per watt hour. And you've got to generate some energy to go into that battery bank. So here is the Goal Zero Boulder 90 solar panel. It's a 90 watt solar panel, as you can see we've highlighted, and it retails for $500. So $500 divided by 90 watts is $5.55 per watt of solar power capacity. This is very expensive. And this is a low wattage panel. And as you see highlighted towards the bottom of your screen, the Boulder 90 paired with the Yeti 400 or Yeti 1250 gives you the ultimate solar power kit. Charge the Yeti 400 in about 9 hours and the Yeti 1250 in about 27 hours with one Boulder 90 panel. So the takeaway here is these are not kits for tiny houses. These are kits for camping. 90 watts is not a lot. I mean, you could have a 100 watt light bulb, right? And this 90 watt panel would not generate enough energy for it. So again, I just want to emphasize comparing apples to apples, and my suggestion is dollars per watt with solar power, solar panels, and dollars per watt hour or amp hour with energy storage. Here's another kit that I've seen that's pretty popular online, Solman solar generator. Top example, you have 2,700 usable watt hours of battery storage. So that's the same as 2.7 kWh. You have 420 watts of solar PV, 420 watts, 420W. That one's advertised for $5,800. Bottom example, you have a little bit less storage capacity. You've got 1,600 watt hours or 1.6 kWh, and you've got 240 watts worth of solar, 240W, and this kit is $2,800. So again, just trying to get you thinking in kilowatt hours and watts, right? Energy storage, kilowatt hours, solar power, solar panels, watts, multiple watts would be a kilowatt. All right, and here's a name you might recognize, Tesla. They have a very popular, sexy energy storage product. And you know, you might say, oh, Tesla, they're an expensive company, they're a premium company, their product's too expensive. But not so fast. Let's look at total cost divided by capacity. So this unit is advertised for $5,500. It's got a usable capacity of 13.5 kilowatt hours or 13,500 watt hours. So when we do the math, it actually turns out to be 41 cents per watt hour of storage. And what was our example with that Goal Zero? 1.33, $1.33 per watt hour, and the Tesla's 41 cents per watt hour. So a higher price tag in total, but on a cost per watt hour, that's actually a much better deal. Now, the only problem is you can't get your hands on these things. They're not available. So don't hold your breath. All right, and one last example. These are some off-grid solar kit options that I offer. So I've designed a good, better, best type offering. So you've got anywhere from 1.68 kW up to 2.24 kW. So you're either going to have 6 280 watt panels like my house, or you can have some extra panels if you want to generate some extra juice. And again, these are actual solar panels that you would see, installed on a normal sized home. I hate saying that because you can install them on a tiny home too. And then let's look at the energy storage highlighted in red at the bottom. So in the good offering, you've got 750 amp hours at 12 volts. So 750 times 12 is going to be 9,000 watt hours, or a 9 kWh. So that's a decent sized system, right? So again, just want to get you guys thinking about everything before you pull the trigger on something that you're going to be unhappy with. But these are my good, better, best options, and I encourage you all to connect with me. tinysolarhouse.com for off-grid solar kits. You can also check out the blog and see where we're headed, where we've been. Facebook.com/tinysolarhouse for all things Facebook. Instagram, use that a lot more. Probably use Instagram the most. So we're Tiny Solar House on both Instagram and Twitter. Connect with us there. Let's share some photos and experiences. And then personally, I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/mpchance. And once again, thank you guys for tuning in. I hope the presentation was educational, and I encourage you all to look into solar and just see if you can work it into your budgets. All right, thanks for watching.